She was always invisible to the millionaire until he saw her in a bikini, and jealousy consumed him. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. Sarah had always been invisible to James. He was a successful millionaire, the kind of man who effortlessly commanded attention wherever he went. But Sarah? She worked at the resort as a server, just another face in the crowd. She'd seen him around. Of course, he was always at the resort, attending meetings and high-end events with other well-dressed guests. But to him, she was just another employee, someone who blended into the background. That is, until one day by the pool. Sarah had taken a rare day off to unwind by the resort's glistening pool. The sun was shining, and the air was warm, but there was something else about that day that felt different. She was wearing a simple black bikini, not trying to impress anyone, just enjoying her rare free moment. But when James walked past the pool, something inside him stopped. For the first time, his eyes locked onto hers. He had seen her before, of course, but this time, something about the way she looked, relaxed, confident, and yet somehow out of place in the luxurious resort setting, caught his attention. He couldn't help but notice her. As she lounged in the sun, completely unaware of his gaze, James felt an unfamiliar pull in his chest. He tried to ignore it. After all, she was just a server at the resort, and he was a millionaire businessman. But as he watched her from a distance, he felt something stirring inside him, something he wasn't used to. Jealousy. He hated to admit it, but it was there. He felt this strange possessiveness when he saw another man approach her, laughing and joking with her like they were old friends. He couldn't understand it. Why did it bother him so much? Why did he care? He walked away, his mind racing, trying to push the thoughts aside. But the more he tried to shake them, the more they clung to him. He had always been the center of attention, but why did this woman, someone he barely knew, suddenly occupy all his thoughts? Sarah, on the other hand, had no idea what was going on in his head. She was too busy trying to enjoy her rare moment of peace. But little did she know, everything was about to change. That day, as she lay by the pool, she unknowingly became the object of James's intense fascination. He was about to realize something profound, that sometimes it's not about what you see, but what you feel that changes everything. The real question was, would he ever have the courage to face her and admit what he was feeling? Stay tuned, because what happens next will change both of their lives forever. The next day, Sarah went back to work, still unaware of the storm she had unintentionally caused in James's mind. She was busy as usual, moving through the resort with her tray of drinks, serving guests, and doing what she did best, trying to keep a low profile. The resort was full of wealthy patrons, and Sarah had long accepted that she was just a small part of the larger picture. Most of them never looked her way, and those who did only saw her as a server. It was a life she had grown used to, a life she didn't expect to change anytime soon. But then came the unexpected twist. James walked into the resort bar later that afternoon, looking as polished as ever in his tailored suit. His eyes scanned the room, and then they locked onto Sarah. She was walking to a table, her back turned, but something in her movement caught his attention again. It was like a magnet pulling him toward her. He wasn't sure what it was, but he couldn't look away. For the first time in a long while, he felt nervous. He hadn't felt this kind of nervous energy in years, maybe ever. It was like he was seeing her for the first time, and this time, it was different. As Sarah approached his table with a tray of drinks, she caught his gaze. Her heart skipped a beat, but she quickly looked down, not knowing what to make of it. She had always kept her distance from the guests, knowing where she stood. She wasn't part of their world. "Hi, I'll be right with you," Sarah said, offering a polite smile before she set down the drinks at the table beside him. She kept her eyes focused on her work, trying to push away the unease building in her chest. But when she turned around to leave, James's voice stopped her. "Sarah." The sound of her name caught her off guard. She hesitated before turning back around to face him. "Yes." She was surprised to hear him speak to her directly. "I hope you don't mind me saying this," James said, his voice low, "but you looked amazing by the pool yesterday." His words felt strange, coming from him. They were too personal for someone who barely knew her. But there was something in the way he spoke that made her heart race. "Thank you," Sarah replied softly, unsure of how to respond. She had never expected this kind of attention from him. "I didn't mean to stare or anything," James continued, his words stumbling out, almost as if he was trying to justify himself. "I just couldn't help but notice." Sarah didn't know what to say. She had never been the type of person to fish for compliments, but hearing him speak so openly about his feelings made her feel both flattered and uncomfortable. She quickly excused herself, not sure how to handle the situation. Over the next few days, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about their interaction. James's words lingered in her mind, replaying over and over again. She didn't understand what had come over him. She had always known she wasn't the type of woman men like James would take an interest in. She was just a waitress, nothing special. But for some reason, the way he had looked at her, the way he had spoken to her, made her feel like she was something more than she had ever thought possible. James, on the other hand, was consumed by the encounter. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. When he had first noticed Sarah by the pool, it was purely physical, a fleeting attraction, something he could easily ignore. But after their brief conversation, something inside him had changed. His attraction to her wasn't just about her appearance, it was something deeper. There was a sincerity in her eyes, a warmth in her smile, that made him want to know more about her. And then there was the jealousy he had felt the day before. That feeling had been strange, something he hadn't experienced in years. He had always been the one in control of his emotions, but with Sarah, he felt completely off balance. He wanted to understand why he couldn't stop thinking about her. It was confusing, to say the least. But he knew one thing for sure. He had to see her again. And not just in passing, like the brief moments they'd had so far. He wanted more. He wanted to really talk to her, to learn who she was beyond the server at the resort. But Sarah wasn't the kind of woman who would make it easy for him. She had spent her whole life keeping her distance from people like him. She wasn't going to let a sudden attraction throw her off track. Still, James couldn't help himself. He found himself returning to the resort more often, hoping to catch another glimpse of her, hoping that she would somehow notice him the way he noticed her. And one evening, as the sun began to set and the sky turned a soft shade of pink, he saw her again. She was outside, taking a quick break, her hair tied back in a messy bun, a tired but content look on her face as she sipped from a coffee cup. She didn't notice him at first, but when she did, she smiled. That smile, warm, genuine, completely different from the polished smiles she gave guests, made his heart skip a beat. And in that moment, James knew that he couldn't ignore these feelings anymore. He had to find a way to talk to her. He had to find a way to make her see him, not as just another guest, but as someone who saw her for who she truly was. A woman who deserved more than just being invisible. James couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to speak to Sarah, but every time he saw her, something held him back. He wasn't used to feeling uncertain, especially not with women. He had always been the one in control, the one people looked up to, but with her, everything felt different. He kept telling himself it was just a passing attraction, something that would fade as quickly as it had appeared. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. He was drawn to her in a way he couldn't explain. That afternoon, as Sarah walked past the bar, she felt a shift in the air. She glanced up and caught James staring at her from across the room. His eyes were intense, focused on her like he was seeing her for the first time. For a moment, she froze. She wasn't used to being noticed like that. At least, not in a way that made her feel like she mattered. But this wasn't just some random gaze. This was different. It was as though the entire room faded away, and it was just the two of them. She couldn't ignore it. She felt a mix of excitement and nervousness swirl inside her, but she quickly pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. She had a job to do. She walked past his table, pretending not to notice him, but the way he was looking at her made it impossible to ignore. He didn't speak at first, and Sarah's heart began to race. She kept her focus ahead, trying to stay calm. Then, as if on cue, James's voice cut through the silence. "Sarah," he said, his voice low and smooth, carrying a tone she had never heard from him before. She stopped and turned to face him, trying to hide the surprise on her face. "Yes?" she asked, her voice steady, though her hands were shaking slightly. He hesitated for a moment before speaking again, his expression softening. "I know this might seem out of place," he began, his eyes never leaving hers. "But I wanted to tell you that you looked incredible by the pool the other day. I don't usually do this, but I couldn't help myself." Sarah felt her cheeks flush. It wasn't every day that someone like James Parker, a man who seemed to have everything, paid her such a compliment. But she wasn't sure what to make of it. She didn't know if he was just being kind or if he genuinely saw her in a different light. "Thank you," she replied quietly, not knowing what else to say. She wanted to thank him, but a part of her was also wary of getting too close. She had learned the hard way that people like James were usually out of her reach. I didn't expect that," she added softly, unsure of how to process the unexpected attention. James smiled, but it wasn't his usual confident smile. It was something more vulnerable, almost shy. "I know I've probably made you uncomfortable, but I really wanted you to know that I've noticed you," he said, his voice sincere. "And not just because of how you look, but because of the way you carry yourself. There's something about you, something real." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had never expected to hear someone like him speak to her like that, especially given their differences. She had always been the invisible one, the woman who went unnoticed. But here was James, a man who could have anyone, telling her that he saw something special in her. She didn't know what to say, so she simply nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Thank you," she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. James looked at her for a long moment, his gaze steady and unwavering. He could tell she was still processing what he had said, but he also knew this was just the beginning. He wasn't going to let her slip away. Not this time. Over the next few days, James found himself coming back to the resort more often, even when he didn't have any business to attend to. He told himself it was just a coincidence, that he was simply visiting a place he had frequented before. But in reality, he was hoping to see Sarah again. He wanted to know more about her. He wanted to know what made her tick, what made her smile. But every time he saw her, she seemed to be lost in her own world, focusing on her work, keeping her distance. And it only made him more determined to break through the walls she had built around herself. One evening, he spotted her in the lobby, talking to a few guests, her warm smile lighting up the room. She looked so confident, so at ease. But as he watched her, he noticed something else. She seemed to be in her element, comfortable in a way that made him want to get closer. He walked up to her, his heart pounding in his chest. "Hey, Sarah," he said, his voice a little shaky despite his usual composure. She turned to face him, her smile fading slightly as she saw who it was. "James," she replied, a hint of surprise in her voice. "What's going on?" He paused, searching for the right words. "I wanted to see if you'd like to grab a coffee sometime," he said. "I mean, outside of work." Sarah looked at him, unsure of how to respond. Was this really happening? Was James Parker, the millionaire who had everything, asking her out? I don't know," she began, her voice hesitant. "I'm not sure if it's a good idea." James's heart sank for a moment, but he wasn't going to give up that easily. "Why not?" he asked, his voice softening. "You don't have to worry about anything. I just want to get to know you better." Sarah hesitated. She knew this was risky, that opening up to him could change everything. But a part of her felt like she had nothing to lose. "Okay," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "I'll go. But don't expect anything more than coffee." James grinned, a feeling of relief washing over him. "I wouldn't dream of it," he said. And with that, something had changed between them. The walls Sarah had built around herself were starting to crumble, and for the first time, she was beginning to let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, someone like James Parker could see her for who she truly was. The next day, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the coffee date. She wasn't sure why she had agreed to it. After all, she had always been the type of person who kept her distance from people like James, people who had wealth and power, people who seemed so far out of her reach. But there was something about him, something real, something different, that made her second-guess her usual rules. She spent the entire morning replaying their conversation in her head, questioning her decision. Was she making a mistake? Should she have just turned him down? But every time she tried to push the thought away, his words echoed in her mind, making her heart race. She found herself smiling, something she hadn't done in a long time. That afternoon, she prepared herself to meet him. As she walked into the coffee shop they had agreed on, she could already feel the butterflies in her stomach. She had chosen a quiet corner, away from the hustle and bustle of the cafe, hoping it would give her some space to think. She didn't know what to expect, but she was nervous. James arrived a few minutes later, looking as polished as ever. His presence was undeniable, even in the casual setting of a coffee shop. He smiled when he saw her, his eyes lighting up. "Hey, Sarah." He greeted her warmly, sitting down across from her. She smiled back, feeling the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. "Hey, James," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. They sat in silence for a moment, both unsure of where to start. Sarah took a sip of her coffee, the warmth of the drink helping to calm her nerves. "So, I guess we're both a little nervous," she said with a light laugh, trying to break the ice. James chuckled, his smile genuine. "Yeah, I guess we are," he agreed. "I've never really done this before. Just meet someone like this. Outside of the usual stuff." Sarah raised an eyebrow, surprised. "You mean, outside of your usual business meetings and parties?" she asked, her voice teasing but not unkind. James nodded. "Exactly. I'm used to being around people who are always talking about deals and money, you know? But with you, it feels different. I don't feel like I have to put on a show." His words took her off guard. She had never imagined that someone like James, someone who had everything, would feel the way she did. She had always assumed that people in his world were so self-assured, so confident in their place, that they never doubted themselves. But here he was, admitting that he felt vulnerable, just like her. It was a humbling realization. "I'm glad to hear that," she said, smiling softly. "I don't usually do this either, you know. I mean, meeting people like you, people with so much." She stopped herself, unsure if she was being too blunt. James raised his hand, cutting her off. "I get it," he said. "I don't want you to think that I'm trying to impress you with what I have. I'm not. I really want to get to know you. For who you are, not for what you do or where you work." Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. Was this real? Was he really saying this? She had always thought that people like James would only see her as a servant. Someone who was there to cater to their needs, someone who was invisible to them. But now, he was telling her that he wanted to see her as more than just that. It was both a relief and a shock. I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice low. James smiled, a soft, understanding smile that made her feel like she could be herself. "You don't have to say anything," he said gently. "I just want you to know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." For the first time, Sarah believed him. She had spent so much of her life building walls around her heart, afraid of letting anyone in. But with James, those walls were beginning to crumble. It felt strange, but in the best way possible. The conversation flowed more easily after that, and by the end of their coffee, Sarah found herself laughing, something she hadn't done in a while. James had a way of making her feel comfortable, like she could be herself, without the need to impress or pretend. As they stood to leave, James walked her to the door. "I'm really glad we did this," he said, his voice sincere. "Me too," Sarah replied, smiling up at him. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Sarah felt a spark between them, a connection that was undeniable. "I'll see you soon?" James asked, his voice hopeful. Sarah nodded. "Yeah, I'd like that," she said. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something real, something worth believing in. The days that followed were a whirlwind for Sarah. After their coffee date, she couldn't stop thinking about James. She had always kept her distance from people like him, the rich, successful ones who seemed to have everything in life. But James was different. He didn't look at her like everyone else did. He didn't see her as just a server at the resort. He saw her as someone worthy of his attention, someone worth getting to know. And that was something she wasn't used to. The next time they saw each other, it was at the resort again, but this time it was different. Sarah was walking through the lobby when she noticed James standing by the bar, talking to a couple of guests. He caught sight of her almost immediately, and a smile spread across his face. It was a genuine smile, one that made Sarah's heart flutter. She hadn't expected to feel this way, but something about James made her feel seen, really seen, for the first time in a long time. As she walked closer, James excused himself from the conversation and made his way over to her. "Hey, Sarah," he said warmly. "How's your day going?" She smiled back, trying to hide the excitement that bubbled inside her. "Good. Just a normal day at work," she replied, her tone casual. But inside, she was anything but casual. She couldn't believe how much she was enjoying their time together. It was like a part of her, a part she'd buried for so long, was finally waking up. "I'm glad to hear that," James said, his voice soft. He looked at her with an intensity that made her feel like she was the only person in the room. I was wondering if you'd like to go out for dinner sometime this week. I know we've only had coffee, but I'd love to spend more time with you. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Was this really happening? Was James really asking her out again? She had always told herself that people like him were out of her league, but here he was, wanting to spend more time with her. I'd like that, she said, her voice quieter than usual. I'd really like that. James's smile widened, and for a moment, Sarah saw a side of him that was completely different from the confident businessman she had first encountered. There was something warm, something kind about him, and it made her feel safe. Over the next few days, they texted back and forth, planning their dinner date. It was strange, having someone like James reach out to her, but it was also exciting. She had never felt this way before, like someone truly cared about her. As the day of their dinner arrived, Sarah spent extra time getting ready. She chose a simple yet elegant dress, something she felt comfortable in, but also something that made her feel good about herself. She didn't want to impress James, but she did want to look nice, especially since he had gone out of his way to ask her out again. When she arrived at the restaurant, she was a little nervous, but also eager to see him. As soon as James walked into the restaurant, his eyes immediately found her. He smiled when he saw her, and it made Sarah's heart race. He looked just as handsome as he had the first time they met, but there was something different in the way he looked at her now. He walked over to her, his gaze never leaving hers. You look stunning, he said, his voice full of admiration. Sarah felt her cheeks flush, but she smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her. Thank you, she replied, her voice soft. You look great too. They sat down, and the conversation flowed easily, like they had known each other for years. Sarah found herself laughing more than she had in a long time, and she realized that James made her feel at ease in a way no one ever had before. As they enjoyed their meal, they shared stories about their lives, their dreams, and their pasts. Sarah found herself opening up in a way she hadn't expected. She talked about her childhood, about her struggles, and about her dream of one day opening her own art studio. James listened intently, asking questions and showing genuine interest in everything she said. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt like someone truly cared about what she had to say. As the night went on, James's attention never wavered. He was completely focused on her, and it made her feel important, like she mattered. It was a feeling she hadn't known she was missing, and now that she had it, she didn't want to let go. When dinner came to an end, James walked her outside to her car. I had a really great time tonight, he said, his voice sincere. I hope we can do this again soon. Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. I'd like that too, she said, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. James leaned in, his eyes meeting hers. You're incredible, Sarah, he said softly. I don't want to rush things, but I just wanted to let you know that I'm really glad we met. Sarah's heart raced at his words, and for a moment, she felt like everything had shifted. She didn't know where this would lead, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe she was worthy of someone's love, someone's attention. As she drove home that night, she couldn't help but smile. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something special. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and James grew closer. Their dinners became regular, and their conversations deeper. Sarah began to realize that what she felt for James wasn't just a passing attraction. It was something real. Every time they met, she felt more at ease with him, more open, as if he was allowing her to see a side of him that no one else had. But with that closeness came a new set of fears. Sarah had always kept her guard up, especially around men like James. She was used to being invisible, used to being overlooked. But now, she was constantly asking herself if she was enough for him. Could someone like her really belong in his world? She wasn't like the women he was used to, women who had everything, wealth, beauty, and status. She was just a waitress, a woman with dreams, but no real way to make them come true. And even though James never made her feel less than, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't quite fit into his life. One evening, they were sitting together at a small cafe, their usual spot, when James brought up a topic that made Sarah's heart skip a beat. I've been thinking, James started, his voice soft but serious. You've been so open with me about your life, about your dreams, and I admire that about you. But I feel like there's more you want to say, things you're holding back. Sarah froze, unsure of how to respond. She hadn't expected him to bring this up. She had always been careful about what she shared, afraid that if she revealed too much, it would push him away. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm just saying that I want to be here for you," James said, his eyes meeting hers with sincerity. "I know it's not easy to open up, especially when you've been through so much. But I want to help you, Sarah. I want to support you however I can." The weight of his words hit her like a wave, and for the first time, she felt a mixture of gratitude and fear. She didn't know how to let someone in. She had built walls around herself for so long, afraid of being hurt, afraid of being vulnerable. But here was James, telling her that he wanted to be there for her, to help her chase her dreams, to stand by her side. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust him, but a part of her was still scared. "I don't know if I can let anyone in like that," she confessed, her voice trembling slightly. "I've been on my own for so long, doing everything myself. It's hard to let go of that." James reached across the table, taking her hand gently in his. "I understand," he said quietly, "but you don't have to do everything alone. You don't have to carry all the weight by yourself." Sarah looked down at their hands, her heart racing. She wanted to believe him. She really did. But there was a part of her that was still unsure. She had spent so many years fighting for her independence, fighting to prove that she could make it on her own, that letting someone else in felt like a step into the unknown. "What if I'm not enough?" Sarah asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if I can't give you what you deserve?" James's grip on her hand tightened, and he leaned in closer, his gaze soft but unwavering. "You are enough," he said, his voice steady and full of conviction. "You don't have to do anything to prove yourself to me. Just being you is enough. You don't need to have everything figured out. I'm not here for what you can give me. I'm here because I care about you." His words washed over her, soothing the doubts that had been swirling in her mind. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen. She felt like she mattered, not because of what she could offer, but because of who she was. James's belief in her began to chip away at the walls she had built around her heart. He wasn't asking her to change. He wasn't asking her to be someone she wasn't. He was accepting her, flaws and all. And in that moment, Sarah realized that maybe she was ready to take a leap of faith. Maybe it was time to stop holding back. "I don't know what the future holds," she said softly, looking into his eyes. "But I think I'm ready to try. I'm ready to let someone in." James smiled, his eyes lighting up with happiness. "That's all I want, Sarah. To see you happy, to see you believe in yourself as much as I believe in you." They sat there for a moment, their hands intertwined, the weight of the conversation settling in, but also the warmth of knowing that they had crossed a threshold together. For the first time, Sarah didn't feel like she was alone in her journey. She felt like she had someone who truly saw her, who was ready to stand by her side. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have a future filled with love, hope, and the possibility of everything she had ever dreamed of. As the weeks passed, Sarah found herself growing more comfortable with James. They spent time together whenever they could, exploring the city, having dinner at her favorite small restaurants, and laughing about the quirks of life. For Sarah, it was like a dream come true. She had always admired people who seemed to live without hesitation, who embraced life and its possibilities. But now, with James, she was beginning to understand what it felt like to let someone in, to share her world with them. James, on the other hand, had never felt more alive. His life, which had once been driven by business deals and endless meetings, now had a new purpose. Sarah had brought a light into his life that he hadn't even realized was missing. He admired her strength, her resilience, and the way she saw the world with fresh eyes, untouched by the cynicism that often came with wealth. But as much as they had grown closer, there was still a part of Sarah that held back. She was afraid that the life they were building was too fragile, that it could slip away if she wasn't careful. She had seen too many people around her get hurt, too many relationships fail, and she didn't want to be another statistic. It was a fear that she couldn't shake, no matter how hard she tried. One evening, as they sat in a small park near her apartment, James sensed that something was off. They had just finished dinner, and Sarah had been quieter than usual. She smiled when he spoke to her, but there was an underlying tension in her that he couldn't ignore. "Hey," he said gently, taking her hand. "What's going on? You've been a little distant lately." Sarah looked at him, her eyes soft, but filled with uncertainty. "I'm fine," she replied quickly, but even she could hear the hesitation in her voice. James wasn't fooled. "Sarah," he said, his voice full of concern. "You know you can talk to me, right? If something's bothering you, I want to know. I'm not going anywhere." His words, sincere and comforting, made her want to open up, but the fear inside her held her back. She couldn't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, he would leave once he realized how flawed and damaged she truly was. She had built walls around her heart for a reason. "I'm just scared," she said finally, her voice trembling. "I'm scared that everything we have will fall apart. I've seen it happen before, with people I care about, and I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose you." James's heart softened at her words. He had always admired her strength, but now he understood that it came from a place of deep vulnerability. He squeezed her hand gently, offering her a reassuring smile. "Sarah, I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice steady. "I know you've been through a lot, and I know it's not easy to let someone in. But I want you to know that I'm here, no matter what. I'm not going to walk away just because things get tough. I'm in this with you." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and she quickly looked away, embarrassed by her emotions. She had never been good at showing weakness, but James's words had broken through the barriers she had built. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't alone. "I want to believe you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But I've been hurt before, and it's hard to trust again." James reached out and gently cupped her face in his hands, lifting her chin so that she had no choice but to meet his eyes. "I get it," he said softly. "I know it's hard, but trust me when I say that I'm not like anyone else you've been with. I care about you, Sarah, for who you are, not for what you can give me or what you've been through. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be yourself." Sarah let out a shaky breath, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. She didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, she realized that she didn't have to carry the burden of fear alone anymore. James was here, and he wasn't going anywhere. She reached up and placed her hand on his, the connection between them solidifying in a way that words could never explain. "I want to be with you, James," she said quietly, her voice steady now. "I just need to believe that I can be enough for you." James's expression softened even more, and he leaned forward, pressing his forehead to hers. "You are enough, Sarah," he whispered. "You're more than enough." For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt a sense of peace. The fear that had plagued her for so long began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of hope. She didn't know where this journey would take them, but she was ready to face it with James by her side. As they sat together, the world around them seemed to disappear. All that mattered was the quiet moment they shared, the promise of a future built on trust, love, and the belief that they were stronger together. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but Sarah was finally ready to take that first step, knowing that she didn't have to walk it alone. The following days were filled with a quiet sense of change, one that Sarah hadn't anticipated. She and James continued to spend time together, each meeting building on the trust they had started to develop. As much as Sarah still carried her fears, she found herself letting them go, bit by bit. There was something about James that made her feel safe, something in the way he looked at her like she mattered. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of being vulnerable with him. But even though things were going well, she couldn't completely shake the feeling that something was lurking beneath the surface, waiting to test the strength of what they had built. And that test came sooner than she expected. It was a Saturday evening when the tension first started to rise. James had invited her to a gala for one of his business partners, an event she knew would be full of the kind of people she had never been comfortable with: wealthy elites, business moguls, and high-profile celebrities. Sarah had been hesitant at first, unsure if she belonged in that world. But James reassured her that it would be fun, that it would be their night to enjoy each other's company without any pressure. So she agreed. When the night arrived, Sarah stood before the full-length mirror in her apartment, staring at her reflection. She wore a simple, yet elegant black dress, the kind she could never have afforded on her own. Her hair was done up in soft waves, and her makeup was light, just enough to make her feel confident. As she gazed at herself, she couldn't help but feel like an outsider, a woman who didn't quite fit into the world she was about to enter. Her heart raced as she thought about the people she would meet. People like James's colleagues, successful, polished, and accustomed to luxury. What if she didn't measure up? What if she embarrassed herself? When James arrived to pick her up, he looked as handsome as ever in his tailored tuxedo. His eyes lit up when he saw her, and a smile tugged at his lips. "You look stunning," he said, his voice full of admiration. Sarah's heart fluttered at the compliment, but she still felt the flutter of uncertainty in her chest. "Thank you," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm not sure I belong in this world, James." He stepped forward, taking her hand gently. "You belong with me," he said, his voice full of conviction. "And that's all that matters. This night is about us, not about anyone else. So don't worry about a thing." His words were exactly what she needed to hear, and for the first time, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. The evening passed in a blur of music, conversations, and fancy dishes, but through it all, Sarah found herself keeping close to James. They moved through the crowd together, exchanging smiles and quiet conversations, but no matter how much fun they had, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. A few hours into the evening, Sarah excused herself to the bathroom. As she walked down the long hallway, she overheard a conversation between two women that made her freeze in her tracks. "Did you hear about the waitress James has been spending time with?" one woman asked in a hushed voice. "I heard she's not even in his league. Just some girl from the resort." Sarah's heart sank. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She wanted to keep walking, to ignore the conversation, but something inside her made her stop and listen. "I don't know," the other woman replied, her voice dripping with judgment. "She's pretty, but she's not his type. I can't see this lasting. He's way out of her league. He'll move on soon enough." Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she felt the sting of their words. She had always known that people like James belonged to a different world, one she could never truly be part of. But hearing those women talk about her so openly, so cruelly, made her feel small, insignificant. She turned quickly, her face flushed with embarrassment, and hurried back to the ballroom. As she rejoined James, she forced a smile, but her mind was racing. She tried to shake off the conversation, but the words echoed in her ears, and a sense of insecurity began to creep in. She couldn't help but wonder, did James see her the same way they did? Was she just a fleeting distraction for him, someone he'd grow tired of once he got bored? James noticed the shift in her mood immediately. "Hey," he said gently, taking her hand. "Are you okay?" Sarah looked up at him, struggling to keep her emotions in check. "I'm fine," she said quickly, forcing a smile. But James wasn't fooled. "Sarah," he said, his voice soft but firm, "you can tell me what's bothering you. I'm not going anywhere, remember?" Sarah hesitated, the weight of her fears threatening to overwhelm her. "I just heard something," she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I overheard some women talking about me, about us. They said I'm not in your league, that this is just some fling for you." James's face softened, and without missing a beat, he pulled her into his arms. "Sarah," he said, his voice filled with sincerity, "I don't care what they think. I care about you. I've never cared about anyone the way I care about you. You're not just some fling. To me, you're everything." His words were like a balm to the wound that had opened inside her. Sarah's heart swelled with emotion as she looked up at him, seeing the truth in his eyes. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't just saying the right things, he meant them. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I don't know how to believe that sometimes." James smiled gently, brushing a stray tear from her cheek. "You don't have to apologize," he said softly. "You've been through a lot, but you have to trust me when I say that I'm here for you, no matter what. I want this. I want us." And in that moment, all of her doubts melted away. Sarah knew that this was real, that James was different. He wasn't just offering her words. He was offering her his heart. And for the first time, Sarah allowed herself to believe it. The days that followed were filled with a sense of peace Sarah had never known. She no longer felt the weight of doubt crushing her every time she saw James. He had made her feel valued, loved, in a way she had never experienced before. Their relationship was growing stronger each day, and Sarah found herself falling deeper for him with every passing moment. It wasn't just his kindness or the way he treated her that drew her in. It was the way he made her believe in herself, in the possibility of a future beyond her fears. James, too, felt the shift in their connection. For so long, he had been living a life that felt empty, driven only by success and expectations. But with Sarah, he discovered something far more meaningful. She made him want to be a better person, not for anyone else, but for her. He had always surrounded himself with people who praised him for his achievements, but Sarah was different. She saw him for who he truly was, not the millionaire businessman everyone else admired, but a man who was capable of love, of vulnerability. One evening, as they walked through a park near her apartment, hand in hand, James stopped and turned to face her. His eyes were serious, but filled with warmth. "Sarah," he said, his voice steady, "I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. You've made me realize that life isn't about wealth or status. It's about the people we choose to love, the connections we make." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had never expected this moment to come so soon, but hearing the sincerity in his voice made her realize how far they had come, how much they had shared. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with emotion. "I want that too, James," she said softly. "I want to be with you. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that I want you in my life." James smiled, a smile that reached his eyes and filled Sarah with a warmth she hadn't known she was missing. "You already are, Sarah," he said, his voice low, full of affection. "You already are." The moment hung between them, and Sarah felt like she had found the missing piece of her life, the one she had been searching for without even knowing it. She didn't need the wealth, the fame, or the fancy things anymore. All she needed was James, his love, and the life they would build together. The very next week, as Sarah was getting ready for another dinner with James, she received a surprise. James had planned something special. She met him at a quiet, intimate restaurant, one that was far removed from the glittering world of the gala they had once attended. It was here, in the soft glow of the candlelight, that James got down on one knee. The ring he held sparkled under the light, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she realized what was happening. "Sarah," James said, his voice trembling slightly with emotion, "you've already made my life more beautiful than I could have ever imagined. I want to spend every single day with you, through all the ups and downs, the quiet moments and the loud ones. Will you marry me?" Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she looked at him, her heart overflowing with love. She had always dreamed of a love like this, one that was real, one that saw her for who she was. And now, standing before the man she loved, she realized she didn't need to dream anymore. She was living it. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you." The moment the words left her lips, James's face lit up, and he stood to pull her into a tight embrace, kissing her softly. It was the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter filled with love, trust, and the promise of a future they would build together. Sarah had finally let go of the fear that had held her back for so long. She had finally allowed herself to believe in the possibility of love, and now she knew, without a doubt, that she had found it in James. Together, they would face whatever challenges life brought their way, but with each other by their side, Sarah knew they could conquer anything. As they left the restaurant, hand in hand, with the soft glow of the streetlights illuminating their path, Sarah felt a sense of peace that she had never known before. She had found her place in the world, not in the wealth or the status she had once felt she didn't belong to, but in the love they shared, and that, she knew, was all she needed.